Yes, the Golden State Warriors, the model image of a top-notch organization. The team everyone has picked to already win the finals this year had picked the last 2 years, and possibly will pick for the next 2 years. It gets harder to deny the fact when it seems like every year they keep adding better and better pieces, becoming more dominant than the previous, with their ever-growing bench depth, experienced vets in Sean Livingston and Andre Iguodala to guide the constant fluctuation of above-par rookies, and a starting five that any other fan base has nightmares of. For new fans to the NBA, it's hard to imagine a time when the Warriors weren't the most dominant force in the league. But what if I told you that less than 10 years ago, the same organization was a bottom-tier lottery team, and that during this time in the 2010 season, this 25 and 56 roster was involved in one of the most interesting games in NBA history. This is TBK. Looking back to 2010, the NBA was a completely different landscape to what we all know and love now. The Lakers were the reigning NBA champions. The Cavs had the best record in the NBA, with LeBron still at the helm, and the Golden State Warriors were tied for the 4th worst record in the league. Quite a disparity to the Warriors we know now, with back-to-back titles and 5 overachieving All-Stars. But what made this season noteworthy for the Warriors wasn't how badly they were playing as a team, but in fact what happened in their final regular season game against the Portland Trailblazers. April 14th, 2010. The final game of the season, a season for the Warriors which had seen a lot of change among their roster. With 6 new additions, many being D-League players due to a plague of injuries, 2 wave players and a buyout, their season is pretty self-explanatory. This team had little to no stability or chemistry, thus the poor end of season result. Regardless, this team went into their closing game with their heads held high, despite the fact there was no chance they were making the playoffs. But before the game even started, problems arose. Due to an insane amount of injuries accumulated over the season, the Steph Curry and Monta Ellis-led Warriors only had 6 healthy players, including themselves. Considering there's only 5 players allowed on the court from both teams at any one time, you might be thinking, what's the problem? Well, there is a stipulation among the NBA rules under Section 7, Paragraph C, which states that a team must have a minimum of 8 players dressed and ready to play in every game. Now, coach of the Warriors at the time, Don Nelson, being the savvy coach he was already aware of this rule and complied, having Anthony Morrow and Ronnie Turiaf both suited up, despite being injured and unable to play. With the starting lineup of Steph Curry, Monta Ellis, Anthony Tolliver, Reggie Williams, and Chris Hunter, with Devin George off the bench, the Warriors had little wiggle room to rotate substitutions, barring Devin George, who played shooting guard and small forward. But 5 minutes into the game, their roster of 6 playable players turned to 5, as their center Chris Hunter injured his knee and was forced to sit on the bench unable to play the remainder of the game. So due to this, the Warriors had to make some adjustments and were forced to sub in Devin George, their one and only bench player. You would think with a 5-man lineup versus the 10-man lineup the Trailblazers had, the Warriors would be at a clear disadvantage, but surprisingly, for the majority of the game, this wasn't the case at all. Curry foreshadowed his current All-Star self, dropping 42 points on 4 of 6 threes. Monta Ellis dropped 34. Tolliver had 19 points and 15 rebounds, with Reggie Williams dropping 11 points of his own. It really looked as if the Warriors had defied all odds and had this in the bag. But with 5 minutes left in the 4th quarter, disaster again struck. Their only bench player, Devin George, had racked up 5 fouls throughout the game, committing his 6th, with 4:47 on the clock. Now, as you may have already recalled, George was subbed in 5 minutes into the game, as there were only other 2 players on the bench who were dressed. Did so only to comply with the NBA stipulation of having a minimum of 8 players dressed and ready to play. But now, following George's 6th foul, they had literally no one on the bench who was fit to play. But under Rule 1, Section A of the Team NBA rules, it states, if a player in the game receives his 6th personal foul and all substitutions have already been disqualified, said player shall remain in the game and shall be charged with a personal and a team foul. Being the guy he was, coach of the Warriors Don Nelson was already aware of this rule and tried to persuade the referees that this was the truth, but to no avail. For some reason or another, the referees didn't budge, and against all logic, made Chris Hunter, who again was injured 5 minutes into the game, play against the will of himself and coach Don Nelson, which seemed to amuse the Trailblazers fans, who were signaling the referees to give Nelson a technical for arguing with the refs. But either way, it was evident Hunter was noticeably injured, and was struggling to walk, hobbling off the bench and checking into the game. A minute after checking into the game, Hunter claims an injury after trying to draw a charge by opposing player Martell Webster. Clutching his knee, Hunter gets up and heads to the bench, after obviously being unable to play. Again, Don Nelson tries to persuade the referees to let their only bench player, Devin George, back into the game. But to my bewilderment, they don't budge, and believe it or not, force the Warriors to sub in another one of their injured players. This time, one of the two who had been suited up, they had been injured in a previous game. Ronny Turiaf. Ronny checks into the game, only to play 15 seconds after intentionally fouling Patty Mills to claim he was injured in the current game, thus giving him immunity to sit out the rest of the game. Now what, you might be asking? Well, remember I said there were two injured players suited up? Yes, Anthony Morrow was now asked to enter the game by the referees. Following in Ronny Turiaf's footsteps, he plays close to 10 seconds, claims he was injured in the game, and heads to the locker room. Now, after finally exhausting all possible players, injured or not, the referees come to their senses and allow Devin George back in the game, leaving the Warriors bench with absolutely no one on it. With 3.5 minutes left in the game and season, the Warriors are down 2 points. It would be understandable, with the roller coaster of the game they've just had, if they just give up. But despite all odds, with literally 5 playable players, the Warriors would go on to secure this game, 122 to 116, with the Warriors going on a 14-6 tear at the end of the game, 11 of which came in the way of Steph Curry. To do what this team did, with the plays they had, was pretty remarkable, considering the Warriors were also a lottery team, and the Blazers were a lock-in for the playoffs that year. It's just that much more of a slap in the face to the Trailblazers, to be beaten by a team who had also played with the same 5 players for 90% of the game. It would definitely be cool to see another game like this upcoming season, as it makes for a good story, and really a good moral behind it, to never give up despite the odds you might be up against. And as always, thanks for watching.